I bought my childhood home 4 years ago. My parents have no idea. Neither does my brother Steven. That's the first thing you need to understand about this situation, because everything else builds from there. I'm 29. Steven is 26. Growing up, our parents Abel and Nell made it clear who mattered. Steven played sports, got decent grades, dated the right girls. I was the kid who liked computers, stayed inside, didn't fit their picture of success. When I was 22 and told them I was skipping college to work in tech, Abel said I was throwing my life away. Nell cried, like I'd announced a terminal illness. Steven just looked embarrassed to be related to me. I moved out that year, rented a place across town, worked my way up, learned everything I could. By 25, I was making good money. Not CEO money, but enough that I could have helped them with their mortgage. They never asked. We saw each other maybe twice a year at holidays, and even then, Abel would find ways to mention how Steven was doing so well, how proud they were of their son. Singular. Like I wasn't sitting right there. 3 years ago, their mortgage company started foreclosure proceedings. I found out through a neighbor who still had my number. My parents never called me, never asked for help, but I saw the public records, saw the missed payments stacking up, and I made an offer, bought the house outright through an LLC. The mortgage company was happy to get paid. My parents got to stay, thought they'd worked out some deal to rent to own. I never corrected them. The rent they pay goes into an account I don't touch. I've been waiting. For what? I wasn't sure. Just knew I'd recognize it when it happened. 2 weeks ago, I was about to start my shift when my phone lit up. Mom's text said I needed to move my car from their driveway. Not our driveway. Theirs. Because Steven was getting married at the house and it embarrassed them in front of his fiance's family. My 2019 sedan apparently screamed failure loud enough to ruin wedding photos. I sat in my car outside work reading that message 3 times. She didn't ask, didn't explain who Steven was marrying or when this wedding was happening, just demanded I move my car like I was a neighbor who'd parked wrong. Then Dad's text came through. Don't come to the wedding. I'd make everything awkward with my loser energy. His exact words, loser energy. Like I was radiating failure and it might infect the ceremony. Steven added his contribution an hour later. His future in-laws were doctors. They didn't need to see what failure looked like. I'd been demoted from brother to cautionary tale. The guy they'd point to and say, "That's why you stay in school, kids." I drove to their house that evening. Not my house, not yet. Still theirs in their minds. Nell opened the door looking stressed, already talking before she fully registered who I was. She was saying something about the caterer running late and did I know anything about flower arrangements, then stopped. Asked what I was doing there. I asked about the wedding. When was it? Who was Steven marrying? Her face did this thing where I could see her trying to figure out the least offensive way to tell me I wasn't invited to my own brother's wedding. She went with the classic. It's a small ceremony. Very intimate. Family only. I asked if I wasn't family anymore. She actually hesitated, like she was considering whether that was true, then said it wasn't like that. They just wanted Steven's day to be perfect. His fiancée, Nina, came from a very successful family. Doctors, like Steven said. Respected people. They had standards. I asked what that meant. She said I knew what it meant. Maybe if I'd made better choices, applied myself, done something with my life. But right now, having me there would raise questions they didn't want to answer. Nina's parents thought they only had one son. Let them keep thinking that. Abel came to the door then. Told me to leave. They were busy. Important people were coming over to discuss logistics. I wasn't important people. I asked if they'd told Nina's family anything about me. Nell said they'd told them Abel had a brother who passed away years ago. Tragic. They didn't like talking about it. Nina's parents had been very understanding. They'd killed me off. Actually invented a dead brother story to explain why family photos only showed Steven. I stood there on the porch of the house I owned, listening to my mother explain how much easier their lives were with me erased. Steven showed up behind them. Wanted to know why I was there. Nina was coming over soon, and they needed me gone before she arrived. Her parents were already suspicious about some things. He didn't elaborate on what things, just said I needed to disappear. I asked if Nina knew about me at all. Steven said she knew he had a brother who made bad choices and they didn't talk anymore. That was enough. She didn't need details. Her family definitely didn't need to meet me. They were helping him start a practice after he finished med school. Real money, real connections. He couldn't risk that by having me show up and prove everything her parents probably already suspected about his background. That's when Mom added the kicker. They'd already posted about it on Facebook, so proud of their only child finding true love. The comments were full of people congratulating them on raising such a successful son. Singular again. I'd been digitally erased just as thoroughly as I'd been erased from the wedding. Dad said if I showed up at the wedding, they'd call the police for trespassing. He wasn't kidding. His hand was already on his phone like he was ready to dial right then. I left, drove back to my apartment, sat there thinking about how thoroughly they'd excommunicated me. Not for anything I'd done to them, just for existing wrong. For not being impressive enough to display to Nina's doctor parents. That's when I opened my safe and pulled out the property deed. My name? My LLC? My house? They'd been living in my property for 3 years, paying rent to an account they thought belonged to some investment company. Every month, they paid me to let them stay in what they thought was still theirs. I called my real estate attorney, asked about the process for ending a rental arrangement. He said with proper notice I could terminate the lease. 30 days, maybe 60, depending on local laws. I told him to start the paperwork. Then I went shopping, found a suit that cost more than their monthly rent payment, got it tailored, bought new shoes, watch, the whole thing. If I was going to crash a wedding as a ghost, I was going to look better than everyone there. The attorney sent me the preliminary eviction notice last week. I had him hold off filing it officially. Timing mattered. I wanted them to have their perfect day first. Wanted Nina's doctor parents to fall in love with the house, with the family, with the whole beautiful lie my parents had constructed. Then I wanted to hand Stephen an envelope during his vows and walk away. The envelope contains a copy of the property deed and a formal eviction notice. 30 days to vacate. The wedding is scheduled for this Saturday. I've already confirmed with the attorney that everything is legal. The rental agreement they signed included a clause about lease termination. They never read it carefully. Why would they? They thought they were on a path to ownership. Shout out to the attorney who helped structure this. You were right. Patience pays off. I'm not looking for them to apologize, not looking for reconciliation or some emotional reunion. I want them to understand what it feels like to be erased, to have something you thought was solid and real disappear, because someone decided you weren't worth keeping around. Saturday, I walk in during the vows, hand Stephen the envelope, leave. By the time they open it and realize what's happening, Nina's family will be standing right there watching their perfect day implode. Mom's going to call. Dad's going to threaten. Stephen's going to panic about what this means for his future practice and his in-laws' opinion of him. None of it matters. They made their choice 2 weeks ago when they told me I embarrassed them, when they announced to social media that I didn't exist. Now they get to explain to a house full of wedding guests why they have 30 days to find somewhere else to live. Why the son they actually acknowledge is about to start married life watching his parents lose their home. Why they're packing boxes instead of enjoying newlywed bliss. The wedding is in 4 days. I've got my suit ready, got the envelope prepared. My attorney has backup copies of everything in case they try to claim I forged documents. Everything is legal, documented, ironclad. 4 more days until they realize the failure they erased owns everything they thought was theirs. Update 1. Saturday came. I'm writing this from a hotel room because I'm not going back to my apartment until this settles. Let me explain. I got to the house at 2 p.m. Ceremony was supposed to start at 2:30. Cars lined both sides of the street. Nice cars. The kind that cost more than my parents' annual rent payments. I parked 3 blocks away, walked up in my suit carrying nothing but that envelope. The backyard was set up with white chairs, flower arrangements, the whole production. Maybe 80 people already seated. I recognized some relatives I hadn't seen in years. None of them recognized me. Why would they? According to family lore, I'd been dead for years. I stayed near the side gate, watched the guests filtering in. Nina's parents were obvious. Front row. Her mom wearing something that probably cost more than my car. Her dad kept checking his watch like he had somewhere more important to be. Stephen stood at the altar looking nervous, which made sense. Guy was about to legally bind himself to a woman whose family thought his background was cleaner than it actually was. Mom and Dad sat in the front row opposite Nina's parents. Mom kept dabbing her eyes with a tissue. Dad looked proud. They'd pulled it off. Erased the embarrassing son. Presented Stephen as an only child from a respectable family. Hosted this whole thing at their house to prove they had stability and class. The music started. Nina came down the aisle. Pretty girl. Looked happy. Had no idea what kind of family she was marrying into. Her dad walked her down, handed her off to Stephen like he was delivering a valuable package that needed to be handled carefully. The officiant started talking. Dearly beloved, we're gathered here today. All the standard lines. I waited until he got to the vows part. That moment when everyone's focused on the couple, when the ceremony hits its emotional peak. I walked down the side aisle. People noticed immediately. Heads turned. I heard someone whisper asking who I was. Mom saw me first. Her face went white. She grabbed Dad's arm. He turned, saw me, started to stand up. I kept walking. Got right up to the altar. Stephen was mid-vow, something about cherishing Nina through all of life's challenges. He stopped talking when he saw me, just froze with his mouth half open. I handed him the envelope, said nothing, turned around and walked back down the aisle. That's when Stephen called after me asking what this was. I didn't answer. His voice got louder. He was telling me to stop, that I couldn't just show up and pull this stunt. Nina was asking what was happening. Her dad stood up looking furious. I made it to the gate before Stephen caught up to me. He grabbed my arm, demanded to know what was in the envelope. I told him to read it. He said they were in the middle of a ceremony. Whatever problem I had could wait. I asked if erasing me from the family could have waited until after they used my property for their celebration. He didn't understand. Kept saying this was Mom and Dad's house. I told him to open the envelope. By then, half the wedding party was standing. Nina's dad was walking over. Mom was crying. Dad looked like he was deciding whether to tackle me. The officiant just stood there holding his little book looking confused. Stephen opened the envelope. I watched his face as he read the first page. The property deed, with my name on it. Then the second page. The formal lease termination notice. 30 days to vacate the premises. He said this was fake. Had to be. Some kind of sick joke. I told him to check the county records if he wanted. Everything was filed and legal. His wedding venue was my house. Had been for 3 years. Nina walked over then, asked Stephen what was going on. He couldn't even answer her. Just kept staring at the papers. Her dad took the envelope from Stephen's hands, read it, looked at me, and asked who I was. I said Stephen's brother, the one who supposedly died years ago. You could hear the reaction from the guests. Everyone knew the dead brother story. Now here I was, very much alive and apparently owning the property this whole celebration was happening on. Nina's mom joined the group, wanted to know what the holdup was. They had a schedule. Her dad handed her the papers. She read them, looked at my parents and asked if this was true. Mom tried to explain, said it was complicated. There had been a misunderstanding. She didn't know anything about this. Dad backed her up saying I must have forged these documents. I was unstable, had issues. They'd tried to help me over the years, but I kept causing problems. I asked if cutting me out of the family and killing me off in their stories counted as trying to help. Nina asked her father what the papers meant. He told her they meant the house belonged to this young man pointing at me, not to Stephen's parents. And apparently there was an eviction notice attached. Stephen finally found his voice, started saying, I couldn't do this, not like this, not at his wedding. We could talk about this later, work something out. But right now, I needed to leave so they could finish the ceremony. I asked why I should care about his ceremony when he didn't care about having a brother. Nina turned to Stephen asking what I meant. He tried to deflect, said it was a long story, not important right now. I told her it was pretty simple, actually. I existed. I was an embarrassment. So they erased me and told her family they only had one son. Her dad asked Mom and Dad directly if this was true. Had they lied about their family? Mom kept crying. Dad said I was making it sound worse than it was. We'd had a falling out years ago. It was easier to simplify the story than explain the whole complicated situation. Nina's mom asked what else they'd lied about. Her dad was already pulling out his phone, probably calling his attorney. These were not people who liked being deceived. Stephen grabbed my shoulders, told me I was ruining everything. His whole future with Nina, her family's support for his practice. All of it was falling apart because I couldn't handle being left out of one wedding. I asked if he seriously thought this was about being left out. He said what else would it be about? So they didn't invite me to a wedding. People have family drama. I didn't need to nuke his entire life over it. That's when Nina spoke up. She wanted to know what was really going on. How long had I been dead in their story? Stephen stumbled through an explanation about how they'd mentioned having a brother who passed away. Nina asked when this supposedly happened. Stephen said a few years ago. Car accident. Tragic. Nina looked at me standing there very much not dead and asked how long I'd actually been alive and uninvited to their wedding. I said my whole life for the alive part. About 2 weeks for the uninvited part. Her dad was still on his phone, talking to someone about property records, checking if what I'd presented was legitimate. Mom tried to approach him, saying they could explain everything. He waved her off. The guests were all standing now. Whispers everywhere. Relatives I hadn't seen in years were pulling out their phones, probably looking up county property records themselves. The Facebook post about the only son was getting real interesting in hindsight. Dad finally lost it, started yelling at me about how I'd always been jealous of Stephen. Never could stand seeing him succeed. Had to come in and destroy his happiness because my own life was so empty. This proved everything they'd said about me was right. I asked what exactly they'd said about me to Nina's family. Dad listed it off. That I'd made bad choices, refused to get real education, bounced between jobs, generally wasted my potential. They'd tried to help, but I rejected every opportunity they offered. Nina's mom asked if any of that was true. I said I worked in tech, made enough to buy houses apparently. Never asked them for anything. The bad choices they mentioned mostly involved not becoming a doctor or lawyer or something impressive enough to brag about. Stephen was trying to salvage things with Nina, saying this didn't change anything between them. His family issues weren't her problem. They could still get married, still start their life together. Her dad overheard and said they actually couldn't get married today. Not here. Not in a house that apparently wasn't owned by who they thought owned it. Not with this much deception floating around. Nina asked Stephen directly why he lied about me. Stephen said he didn't lie exactly, just didn't correct his parents when they simplified things. Nina pointed out that calling someone dead when they're alive wasn't simplifying. It was lying. The officiant tried to suggest they take a break. Let everyone calm down. Maybe reconvene in an hour. Nina's mom shut that down fast. Said they weren't reconvening anything until they understood what else this family had lied about. Abel tried the authority angle, told me I had no right to show up and ruin everything like this. Over what? Some hurt feelings? I was 30 years old. Time to grow up and let things go. I reminded him I was 29 actually, but thanks for remembering my age wrong. Really drove home how much attention he'd paid over the years. One of Nina's relatives asked loudly if someone could explain what was happening. Her dad announced they were canceling the ceremony. There were too many questions. Too much information that didn't match what they'd been told. They'd be in touch once they sorted through everything. Nina looked at Stephen and asked if he even knew about the house situation. He said no. Swore he didn't know. Thought his parents actually owned it. I asked him if he'd ever wondered why I stopped coming around. If he ever asked mom and dad what happened to his brother. He said honestly, no. He figured I was off doing my own thing. We'd never been that close anyway. I asked if that made it okay to pretend I didn't exist. He said that wasn't his decision. That was mom and dad's choice. He just went along with it because it was easier. Nina pulled off her engagement ring. Told Stephen she needed time to think. That finding out her fiancé's entire family structure was a lie wasn't something she could just ignore. Her dad was already heading for the parking lot. Her mom followed. Nina went with them. The other guests started leaving. People were confused, upset. Relatives who'd known me as a kid were trying to process how I'd been dead all this time when I was clearly standing right there. Mom sat down in one of the white chairs and sobbed. Dad stood over her looking furious. Stephen turned on me, said I'd destroyed his life, his relationship, his future, all because I was petty and vengeful and couldn't stand being excluded. I asked if he remembered what he said to me 2 weeks ago, about his future in-laws not needing to see what failure looks like. He said that was just words. Heat of the moment. I took it too seriously. I told him those weren't my words about the situation. Those were his exact words to me. About me. His brother. And yeah, I took them seriously because they meant I didn't exist to him as anything but an embarrassment. Dad came over. Demanded to know what I thought I was accomplishing. I'd ruined Stephen's wedding. Destroyed their reputation in front of everyone. Made them look like liars. For what? Revenge? Did that make me feel better? I said honestly, yes. Yes, it did. Watching them explain to Nina's family why they'd constructed this elaborate lie felt approximately as good as I'd hoped it would. Mom stood up, tried a different approach, said we could fix this. I could take back the eviction notice. She'd explained to Nina's parents that there'd been a misunderstanding. Maybe we could reschedule the wedding, start over fresh with everyone being honest. I asked why I would do any of that. She said because we're family. Because Stephen didn't deserve to lose Nina over something I did. I pointed out that Stephen apparently lost Nina over something they did. The lying part. That was all them. Stephen asked what I wanted. Money? An apology? What would it take to make this go away? I said 30 days, same as the eviction notice. They had a month to figure out their next move. Dad said we weren't done with this. He'd fight the eviction, prove I'd manipulated them somehow. Maybe the LLC purchase wasn't legal. He'd find something. I told him to talk to his attorney about it. Everything was filed correctly. I'd made sure of that. The backyard was empty now, except for us, and the catering staff who were standing around looking uncomfortable. The officiant had packed up and left. White chairs sat in rows, waiting for a ceremony that wasn't happening. Stephen asked one more time if I was really doing this, really kicking them out. I said I was really enforcing a legal eviction notice on a property I legally owned. What they'd been doing was living there thinking it was theirs. Now they knew it wasn't. I left them standing there and got back to my car, drove to a hotel, checked in, and that's where I am now. My phone has been blowing up for 6 hours. Mom calling, Dad texting threats, Stephen leaving voicemails asking to talk, some of the relatives messaging on Facebook wanting to know what happened to me after the supposed car accident that killed me. I haven't answered any of them. The eviction notice is filed. The clock is ticking. They've got 29 days left to figure out where they're going. Nina hasn't contacted me, neither have her parents. But I'm guessing those conversations between her and Steven are going real well right about now. Update 2. It's been 5 days since the wedding that wasn't. Things have escalated in ways I didn't fully anticipate, so here's where we are. Monday morning, my attorney called. Dad had contacted a real estate lawyer trying to challenge the eviction. Their argument was that the LLC purchase was fraudulent because I hadn't disclosed my identity as their son when buying the property. My attorney laughed, said there's no legal requirement to disclose family relationships in a legitimate property purchase. The foreclosure company sold to the highest bidder who had cash. That was me. Everything was filed correctly, notarized, recorded with the county. Their lawyer apparently told them the same thing after reviewing the documents. Dad tried arguing that the rental agreement was signed under false pretenses, that they wouldn't have signed if they'd known it was me. My attorney pointed out that the LLC name was clearly stated on all documents. If they didn't research who owned the LLC before signing a multi-year lease agreement, that was their failure to do due diligence. The contract is valid. The eviction stands. They're still in the house. Still have 24 days left. But now they're scrambling to understand how bad this actually is for them. Steven showed up at my hotel Tuesday evening. Don't know how he found out where I was staying. Maybe he called around to every hotel in the area. I was coming back from getting dinner when I saw him in the parking lot leaning against my car. He wanted to talk. I asked what there was to talk about. He said everything. Nina was demanding answers about our family that he couldn't give because he'd never bothered to ask the questions. Her parents were still furious about the deception. The wedding was obviously off. But more than that, Nina's dad had been asking questions about our family finances, about why the house had gone into foreclosure, about what other things mom and dad might have lied about. I asked why that was my problem. Steven said it wasn't. But he needed to understand what actually happened between me and our parents. Why I left. Why they treated me the way they did. Because Nina's parents were treating the whole dead brother lie as a symptom of deeper dysfunction. And he was realizing he didn't actually know his own family history. So I told him. Told him about every time Dad made comments about my career choices being worthless. Every holiday where I sat there while they bragged about Steven's accomplishments and said nothing about mine. How when I bought my first car at 23 with money I'd saved, Dad asked if I'd gotten it from a buy here, pay here lot because surely I couldn't qualify for real financing. How Mom would introduce Steven to her friends as her son and introduce me as, well, this is also our kid. Steven listened, then said he'd never noticed any of that. From his perspective, we just had different interests and different relationships with our parents. He didn't realize I felt pushed out. I asked how he didn't realize that I stopped coming to family events, that my number changed and nobody asked for the new one, that I missed 3 consecutive Christmases and nobody checked if I was alive. He admitted he'd assumed I was busy, building my career, doing my own thing. It never occurred to him that I'd been cut off. I asked if it occurred to him when Mom and Dad told Nina's family I was dead. He said obviously that was messed up, but he thought they'd just panicked when Nina's mom asked about other children. Made up something stupid in the moment. He didn't think it was part of a pattern. I asked if he remembered what he texted me 2 weeks ago about his future in-laws not needing to see what failure looks like. He got quiet, said that was bad. He'd been stressed about making a good impression. Didn't mean it the way it sounded. I told him it sounded like he thought I was an embarrassment. He said maybe he did think that a little bit. Not because of who I was, but because of how Mom and Dad talked about me. He'd absorbed their narrative without questioning it. That's when he asked if I'd really go through with the eviction, if I'd actually force our parents out of their home. I said it wasn't their home. It was mine. Had been for 3 years. They'd just been living in it thinking it was theirs. He asked what I wanted them to do. I said figure out housing. Same thing millions of renters do when a lease ends. Steven said they couldn't afford anywhere decent. Their credit was trashed from the foreclosure. Most landlords wouldn't rent to them. They'd been barely making the rent payments to my LLC as it was. I pointed out that wasn't my problem. They'd made choices that led to foreclosure. I'd made a choice to buy the property. Now I was making a choice to take possession of what was legally mine. He asked about Mom. Said she'd been having panic attacks since Saturday. Couldn't sleep. Kept calling relatives trying to explain what happened. Dad was angry all the time. They were fighting constantly about whose fault this was. I asked whose fault Steven thought it was. He said probably theirs for lying about me, but also maybe mine for hiding the fact that I owned the house. I told him I didn't hide it. I purchased property through legitimate means. They signed a rental agreement. Those are separate facts that I had no obligation to connect for them. Steven said that felt like splitting hairs. We were family. Family doesn't set each other up for public humiliation. I asked him to repeat what he just said slower so he could hear how it sounded. He left after that, said he had to get back because he was supposed to call Nina at 9 and he couldn't be late again. She'd already accused him of prioritizing our family drama over their relationship. He was trying to prove that wasn't true, while also dealing with the fact that his parents were falling apart. Wednesday, I got a call from my Aunt Lucille, Dad's sister. Hadn't talked to her in probably 4 years. She wanted to know what was going on. She'd heard about the wedding from another relative, heard that I'd shown up and caused some kind of scene. Then she'd seen the Facebook post from Saturday that congratulated Abel and Nell on their only son's wedding. She remembered very clearly that Abel had 2 sons because she'd been at both of our baby showers. I explained the whole situation, the foreclosure, the purchase, the erasure from family narrative, the wedding disruption. She was quiet for a long time, then asked if I was serious about the eviction. I said yes. She asked if I understood that would leave my parents effectively homeless. I said they'd have to find somewhere to live like everyone else who gets evicted. Lucille said I was being cruel, that whatever issues we had, making them lose their home crossed a line. I asked where the line was exactly. Was it before or after telling people I was dead? Before or after uninviting me from a wedding being held at property I owned? She said 2 wrongs didn't make a right. I said I wasn't interested in right, I was interested in consequences. She said the family was talking. People were taking sides. Some relatives thought I was justified. Others thought I was vindictive. Everyone agreed it was ugly. I told her that was fine. They could think whatever they wanted. The eviction was legal and it was happening. Thursday, Mom tried a different approach. Showed up at my work. Security called me down because there was someone in the lobby asking for me. I came down, and there she was sitting in one of the waiting area chairs looking exhausted. She wanted to talk somewhere private. I said we could talk right there. She started crying immediately. Said she was sorry, that they'd made mistakes. That she never should have gone along with pretending I didn't exist. It had started small. Nina's mom asked how many children they had. Nell had hesitated because saying 2 would lead to questions about where I was and why we didn't talk. Saying 1 seemed easier in the moment. Then it snowballed. One lie led to another. The dead brother story came later when Nina's family wanted to know if Stephen had siblings. By then, they were in too deep to backtrack. They thought they could get through the wedding and then maybe slowly reintroduce the truth later. They never expected me to find out. I asked how they expected me not to find out about my own brother's wedding. She said they'd hoped I wouldn't care, that I'd moved on with my life and wouldn't be keeping track of family events. I pointed out that moving on from family requires family to be worth coming back to. She asked what it would take to stop the eviction. Money? I could keep the house. They'd move out voluntarily. Just give them more time. 6 months maybe. I asked what would change in 6 months. She said they'd find somewhere affordable. Save up for deposits. Dad would maybe find better work. I told her Dad was 61. Whatever work he found now was what he'd be doing. 6 months wouldn't change that. She tried the guilt angle. Said I was destroying them, that Stephen's relationship was falling apart because of this, that their reputation in the community was ruined. Everyone knew they'd lied about me. Church members were asking questions. Their neighbors were whispering. Dad's poker buddies were making comments. I asked if she understood that those consequences came from their choices, not from mine. Mom said I didn't understand what it was like to be them. They'd wanted so badly for Stephen to have opportunities they never had. Nina came from money. Real money. Her family could help Stephen establish his practice, could introduce him to the right people. They needed Stephen's marriage to work because it was his ticket to the life he deserved. I asked where my ticket was in all of that. She said I'd made my own way, built my own career. I didn't need their help. Stephen needed the support more. I asked if erasing me was necessary to support Stephen. She didn't have an answer for that. Security eventually asked her to leave. She'd been there almost an hour. Before she left, she tried one more time. Asked if there was anything she could say that would change my mind. I told her to talk to the attorney about the eviction timeline. She said I'd become someone she didn't recognize. Someone cold. I said she never recognized me anyway, so what difference did it make? Friday, I got a message from Stephen on Instagram. Nina had called off the engagement completely, not postponed. Done. Her parents had hired an investigator to look into our family, found out about the foreclosure, found out about multiple maxed credit cards, found out Dad had filed bankruptcy 8 years ago, found out Mom had worked 3 different retail jobs in the past 5 years. Everything they'd presented to Nina's family as stable and established was actually held together with duct tape and lies. Nina's parents decided their daughter deserved better than marrying into dysfunction. Stephen was devastated. Said he'd lost the woman he loved because I couldn't let go of some grudges. I told him he'd lost her because he built their relationship on lies he didn't even verify were necessary. He said I was splitting hairs again, that the bottom line was his life was ruined because I wanted revenge. I asked if he'd considered that maybe his life was built on shaky foundation to begin with, that Nina deserving to know the truth about her future in-laws wasn't revenge. It was basic honesty that should have happened before the wedding got planned. He said that was easy for me to say since I wasn't the one losing everything. Extended family drama is getting worse. Lucille called 3 more times trying to broker some kind of peace. Other relatives have been messaging asking what really happened. Some of them are angry at my parents for the lying. Others are angry at me for the eviction. Family group chats I wasn't even in are apparently blowing up with arguments about who's wrong and how wrong they are. My parents hired a moving company to give them an estimate on packing and transport. According to Stephen, they broke down when they saw the quote. They don't have that kind of money. They're looking at doing it themselves with whatever help they can get from relatives. But half the family isn't speaking to them now because of the lies, so help is limited. Stephen asked if I'd at least let them take the furniture. Some of it was theirs from before the foreclosure. I checked with my attorney. Legally, anything they moved into the house is theirs to take. I'm not interested in their furniture, I just want the property empty. They have 19 days left. Mom is making lists of everything they need to pack. Dad is barely speaking to anyone. Stephen is trying to fix his relationship with Nina while also helping his parents figure out logistics. The family is fractured and everyone's pointing fingers about whose fault it ultimately is. And I'm sitting here watching it unfold exactly how I knew it would when I bought that house 3 years ago. The only question left is where they're going to end up on day 31 when the locks get changed. Final update. Day 30 arrived. I'm writing this from the house, my house. Empty now except for some furniture they couldn't fit in the U-Haul they rented. Let me back up and tell you how we got here because the last 2 weeks were something else. Week 3 of the eviction countdown, Dad tried the anger approach. Showed up at my hotel again, this time with Stephen. They cornered me in the parking lot as I was leaving for work. Dad started going off about how I'd turned into a vindictive person who got satisfaction from hurting his own family, that I was punishing them for mistakes they'd apologized for, that at some point I needed to decide if revenge was worth destroying every relationship I had. I asked what relationships I was destroying. The one where they pretended I didn't exist? The one where my brother called me a failure to impress his in-laws? Dad said those were isolated incidents blown out of proportion, that families have conflicts. Real adults work through them instead of going nuclear. Stephen jumped in trying the reasonable brother angle, said he'd been thinking about everything, about how they'd treated me over the years. He could see now that it wasn't right. He got that I was angry. But this wasn't just hurting Mom and Dad. The whole family was fracturing. Cousins weren't talking to each other. Lucille had stopped speaking to Dad entirely. Thanksgiving was going to be a disaster because nobody knew whose side to take. I said maybe they should take the side of not lying about dead brothers. Stephen said I was being reductive, that real life was complicated. People made mistakes under pressure. I asked if 7 years of being pushed out counted as pressure or pattern. He didn't have an answer for that. Dad said they'd found an apartment, 2-bedroom place about 40 minutes away. Rough neighborhood. Small? Nothing like the house. But it was what they could afford with their credit situation. The deposit alone had wiped out their savings. They needed to hire movers but couldn't afford professional ones anymore. They were begging relatives to help, but most people were staying out of it. He wanted me to know that's what I'd done to them. Forced them into a bad apartment in a bad area because I couldn't forgive them for some hurt feelings. I told him those hurt feelings had names and dates attached. Every Christmas, I spent alone. Every achievement of mine they ignored. Every time they introduced Stephen as their son and me as the other one. Stephen said I was keeping score of things that happened years ago, that holding on to resentment that long wasn't healthy. I asked when exactly I should have let it go. When they uninvited me to the wedding? When they told Nina's family I was dead? He said obviously before then. Back when it was still fixable, I told them the eviction stood. They had 11 days left. Dad said I'd regret this. That family was forever, and I was burning bridges I'd never rebuild. I said the bridges burned years ago. I was just making sure everyone knew they were gone. They left. Stephen texted me later saying he'd never seen Dad that defeated. That Mom was barely functioning. That they were packing boxes and crying over photos of when we were kids, when things were supposedly better. I didn't respond. Lucille called me 4 more times that week, each time more desperate. She'd offered to let them stay with her temporarily, but her place was tiny. 1-bedroom apartment. She was retired and on fixed income. Couldn't support 3 adults long term. She wanted me to extend the eviction deadline, give them 60 days instead of 30. Let them find something better. I asked why that was my responsibility. She said because I had the power to help and wasn't using it. That made me as bad as them. I said no. It made me someone who owned property and wanted it vacant. She called me cold. Said I'd changed into someone she didn't recognize. I told her she hadn't recognized me in 4 years anyway, so her opinion didn't carry much weight. Week 4 got intense. Mom started calling from different numbers because I'd blocked hers. She'd get through and immediately start talking before I could hang up, telling me about items they were packing, Dad's tools from the garage, her kitchen stuff, photo albums. Each call was her trying to make me visualize them losing their home piece by piece. One call, she told me about finding my old room stuff in the attic, report cards, school projects, a trophy from some academic competition I'd won in 8th grade. She said they'd kept everything, that they'd never thrown away any trace of me even though I thought they had. I asked why it was in the attic instead of displayed like Steven's stuff. She didn't have an answer. Steven's situation with Nina got worse. She'd agreed to talk to him one time to get closure. They met at a park. He tried to explain that his family issues weren't his fault, that he'd been lied to as much as she had. She said the difference was he'd participated in the lies. He'd gone along with erasing me because it was convenient. That showed character problems she couldn't overlook. He'd asked if there was any chance they could work past it. She said no. Her parents had been clear. They wouldn't support a marriage into a family with that level of dysfunction. Even if she disagreed with them, she couldn't handle the constant questions about what else Steven might be hiding. Trust was gone. Steven blamed me for that in another parking lot confrontation. Said Nina was the best thing that ever happened to him and I'd destroyed it out of spite. I said Nina left him because he was a liar who came from liars. That wasn't spite, that was consequence. He said I was playing semantics, that I knew exactly what I'd done and was proud of myself for ruining his life. I asked if he remembered telling me his future in-laws didn't need to see what failure looked like. He went quiet, said he'd apologized for that he'd admitted it was wrong. I told him apologizing didn't erase it, didn't change that he'd meant it when he said it. He'd genuinely believed I was an embarrassment worth hiding. Now he got to feel what it was like to be the embarrassment. 3 days before eviction day, Mom and Dad tried one final strategy. They showed up at the house with a real estate agent, told me they wanted to buy the house back. They'd get a loan somehow, work out payments, whatever it took. The agent looked uncomfortable. I asked what bank was going to give them a loan with their credit. Dad said they'd find someone, private lenders, hard money loans. They'd figure it out. I told them no. The house wasn't for sale to them. Dad asked what I was going to do with it then. Live there myself? Rent it to strangers? I said I hadn't decided yet. Might sell it. Might renovate and flip it. Might rent it out. But whatever I did, they wouldn't be involved. Mom lost it then. Started screaming that I was a monster. That she'd given birth to me and raised me. And this was how I repaid her. By making her homeless. By destroying her family. By turning her sons against each other. Dad tried to calm her down, but she kept going. Said I was worse than a stranger. At least strangers had the excuse of not knowing them. I knew them and was choosing cruelty anyway. I asked if she knew me. If she could name one thing about my life from the past 5 years. Where I worked, what I did for hobbies, who my friends were, anything. She couldn't answer. Kept saying that wasn't the point. The point was I was her son, and I was supposed to love her regardless. I said love goes both ways. She'd stopped showing it years ago. The real estate agent excused herself and left. Mom and Dad stood in the driveway looking lost. Dad asked one more time if there was anything that would change my mind. I said no. They had 3 days to be completely moved out or I'd have the sheriff remove them and their belongings. Moving day was yesterday. I showed up at 8 a.m. There was a U-Haul in the driveway. Steven and 2 cousins I barely knew were loading boxes. Mom was sitting on the front steps crying. Dad was inside wrapping dishes in newspaper. I walked in. Dad saw me, and his face went hard. Asked what I was doing there. I said, checking on the move-out progress. He said, I'd made my point. Could have let them do this with some dignity instead of standing there watching. I said I wanted to make sure they took everything, that nothing got left behind that I'd have to deal with. Mom came inside, started another round of begging. Please don't do this. There was still time to stop it. They could work something out. I could keep the house and they could stay as tenants. Real tenants who paid market rate. They'd sign any agreement I wanted. I asked why I would want them as tenants when they'd spent years treating me like I didn't deserve to exist. Steven came in carrying a box. Told Mom to stop. That it wasn't working. I'd made my decision and nothing was going to change it. Mom said she couldn't just give up. This was her home. Her memories. 32 years in this house. I pointed out only 29 of those years included me. And they'd managed to forget about me anyway, so the memories weren't that important. The loading took hours. Every piece of furniture had to be debated. Would it fit in the apartment? Could they sell it? Should they store it somewhere? Dad's workshop stuff from the garage filled half the truck by itself. Mom's kitchen equipment took up another quarter. They were running out of space. Around noon, Stephen asked if they could make 2 trips. The apartment was an hour round trip. If they unloaded and came back, they could get the rest. I said no. Whatever didn't fit in this load stayed here. They could decide what was important enough to take. That started another round of arguments. Mom insisting she needed her china cabinet. Dad saying his tools couldn't be left behind. Stephen trying to play mediator and failing. They ended up leaving the china cabinet, a couch, 2 dressers, and a bunch of smaller items they couldn't fit. By 3 p.m., the truck was packed. Dad did a final walkthrough. I followed him room to room. He stopped in what used to be my bedroom, empty now except for carpet indentations where furniture had been. He said this was where I grew up, where I'd slept for 18 years. He'd taught me to ride a bike in this driveway. Mom had made me breakfast in that kitchen every morning before school. I asked if he remembered when I told him I was going into tech instead of college. What he'd said to me. He said he remembered. Said he'd been harsh. That he'd wanted me to have security and structure. I asked if he thought erasing me from the family gave me security. He said that came later. That it wasn't connected to the college thing. I told him it was all connected. Every dismissal, every comparison to Stephen, every time they prioritized his achievements over acknowledging mine. It built into this. Into them being comfortable enough with my absence that pretending I was dead seemed reasonable. Dad said if he could take it back, he would. All of it. I said too late. The eviction was done. They needed to leave. Mom couldn't look at me when they left. Just got in the car staring straight ahead. Dad drove the U-Haul. Stephen followed in his car. The cousins had already left. I stood in the driveway watching them pull away. Called a locksmith. Had every lock changed within 2 hours. New keys. New deadbolts. The works. I'm sitting in the empty living room now. Their furniture is still here. The stuff they couldn't take. I'll have someone haul it away tomorrow. Donate it or trash it. Doesn't matter. The house is quiet. Weirdly quiet. I walked through every room, looked at the walls where their pictures used to hang, the kitchen where Mom spent so much time, the garage where Dad had his workshop. All empty now. My attorney already confirmed they're out. Officially, the property is solely mine now without any tenants or occupants. I can do whatever I want with it. Extended family drama is still ongoing. Half of them aren't speaking to me. The other half aren't speaking to my parents. Lucille keeps trying to organize some kind of family meeting to work through everything. Nobody's interested. The fracture is permanent. Stephen sent me a message an hour ago. They got to the apartment. It's worse than they thought. Neighbors are loud. The area feels unsafe. Mom's already talking about how long they'll have to live there. Dad's applying for jobs, but at 61, most places aren't interested. They're looking at this being their reality for the foreseeable future. He wanted me to know that. Wanted me to understand the full scope of what I'd done. I told him I understood perfectly. They'd spent years making me understand I didn't fit into their life. Now they didn't fit into mine. We were even. He said we'd never be even. That what I'd done was worse than anything they'd done to me. I asked how? He said because I'd done it deliberately, with planning, with malice. They'd just been thoughtless. I'd been cruel. I told him thoughtless for 7 years becomes deliberate, that they'd made choices every single day to keep me pushed out. Those choices added up to the same result as malice. He stopped responding after that. Nina's parents apparently heard about the eviction through Stephen. They told Nina it confirmed their instincts about the family, that the dysfunction ran deeper than they'd thought. Nina hasn't contacted Stephen since. According to him, she's blocked his number, changed her social media settings, made it clear she's done. My parents are in that apartment tonight, unpacking boxes in a space half the size of what they're used to, in a neighborhood they don't feel safe in, sleeping on a mattress on the floor because their bed frame didn't fit in the truck. That's where they are, because they decided having me in their life embarrassed them. Some commenters from my last update asked if I feel guilty, if seeing them actually lose their home changed anything for me. Honest answer is no. I feel exactly like I thought I'd feel. Vindicated, satisfied, like I spent 3 years waiting for this exact moment and it delivered. They erased me from their family, told people I was dead, uninvited me from a wedding at my own property because I'd make them look bad. They don't get to be surprised that I erased them from my house. The house goes on the market next week. I'm selling it. Don't want to be a landlord. Don't want to keep any connection to this property or this part of my life. My attorney's already contacted a real estate agent. Market's good. Should sell quickly. I'll make a solid profit and move on. That's the part they don't know yet, that I'm not keeping it. That this entire thing was about removing them from a space they thought was theirs. Once that's done, the house itself doesn't matter to me. It served its purpose. They spent years making me feel like I didn't belong anywhere in their life. Now they don't belong anywhere in mine. The house was just the clearest way to show them what that feels like. So yeah, the locks are changed. They're out. I'm sitting in an empty house that used to be their whole world. And I'm fine with every single part of how this played out.